The classroom is a trauma-informed practice because you're creating a well-being center whether you know it or not. So hello and welcome to Unleashed Learning TV and Unleashed Learning Radio. So I got a question for you. Is well-being stressing you out, like at your school or your network or district? The incredible well-being work taking place can sometimes feel like, oh my gosh, we've got one more thing to do. So we're turning the tables again, and Dr. Suzy Green from the Positivity Institute called me one day and said, hey, William, can I interview you about the connection between high quality teaching and learning and well-being? So I'm about to hand the microphone over to Suzy. You know her as the leader of the Positivity Institute. Suzy and I have been running retreats for many years. This episode is for you if you're trying to advance teaching and learning school-wide and you want to ensure well-being is integrated into that system for good. Here we go.
Well, welcome. I'm Dr. Suzy Green, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Positivity Institute. And today I'm taking over the channel. And it's my opportunity to interview my colleague and friend, Dr. William DeJean. Now, many of you may know that my expertise lies in the application of wellbeing science and also performance science in workplaces. And I've spent a lot of time in my career doing that in schools. I've also seen many schools really struggle with making that connection between teaching and learning and well-being. And how do we make it stick? So, William, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to fire some questions at you today and hoping to draw out some of your knowledge and experience in this really important integration piece. So can we...
Hope I can do it. Let's do it.
Good. Oh, fantastic. So how can a school put together a teaching, learning, and well-being framework?
The thing about it is, Suzy, is that what I would encourage schools to think about when and well-being is causing this to happen, equity and diversity is causing this to happen, teaching strategies, reading this, it's overwhelming, right? Absolutely. So what's happening is there's an old way to advance teaching and learning, and there's a new way. And the new way to advance teaching and learning is we need a much more holistic and inclusive understanding of teaching and learning, but also we need a teaching and learning mission, which most schools don't have, so that the mission is going to inform how we think about teaching and learning. And then stuff that comes to us will be used in service of teaching and learning. So we need a bigger approach, and that bigger approach, and we know the science of it from a teaching and learning standpoint, the well-being of students and teachers are in service of teaching and learning. So it fits in there. A way of thinking about it is there's a ship, and we got to know where the ship's trying to go, and where does well-being fit into the ship? And the second thing I would say is when there is initial pushback, probably for well-being, because they go, oh my gosh, one more thing to do. Where does this fit? It sometimes is because there's this thing called the delivery model of education. The delivery model is literally what the word means. Like YouTube, you can deliver, and you can deliver. And in a delivery model, well-being doesn't matter because you're just filling people's heads up. And the cool thing about the discussion about well-being is it forces us to think about what is effective teaching and learning. But if you're trying to get outcomes, the delivery model is not going to get behavioral change. Just knowing information is not going to do it. So we need a bigger approach. And that approach, and I think when we talk about it, we'll see how these pieces fit without going into wicked detail about it.
Yeah, there's so much I could respond to there, but I know it's your chance to be interviewed today. But just a couple of things that come to mind to me, William, is we know from the research that when people are experiencing high levels of well-being, and in particular, a higher degree of positive emotions, they are able to think strategically and be more creative and be innovative. And with so many teachers and in particular school leaders being burnout, and we can see the stats on this at the moment, how do they and I guess, that's a question for both of us or for all of us. How do they maintain this big picture thinking when they're under the pump? Have you seen any great examples in your experience?
Well, there's practical things we do. I think there's the piece where I think we got to back up even another step, because I think what's happening is we are, again, we're actually in a new era. And the new era, I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but we do need to talk about what's happening.
Mm.
All the channels are on. So delivery is happening everywhere. So people's cognitive loads are through the roof. And if there's resistance to professional learning, I often think it's just because people are trying to protect their
Absolutely.
cognitive load.
Yeah.
So I think what needs to happen is a couple things. There are systems thinking that we really need systems thinking around this. And one of the places, and one of the things that was interesting about Unleashed Learning in year 3, a teacher said to me, "Oh, my stress is dropping." And I said, "Why is your stress dropping?" And she said, "Because I finally have a way to organize this and I'm not overwhelmed." So what I think the leaders need to do, and this is the Margaret Wheatley piece, is create islands of sanity. And we put structures that actually can lower cognitive load. And then the practical, and we've talked about this a million times, is in the practical, and we do this at Unleashed Learning, but teachers have to have their own classrooms, full stop.
Mm.
A teacher cannot be jumping from ship to ship to ship to ship every day and thinking they're going to be effective. It's just not possible.
Mm.
So there are structural things that the leaders put into place. Margaret Wheatley talked about islands of sanity. I think Unleashed Learning does that, but you have to hold the wave back because the state's going to say, now it's this, and now it's this, and now it's this. But if you have the right structure, when that stuff comes, you can easily bring it into the structure and the cognitive load is down.
Yeah.
So
Again,
I really want to mention the cognitive load. Sorry to interrupt you.
no, I think that's so important that the structure and the system and the policies and the procedures, when we know now, particularly here in Australia, where we're the first country in the world to have psychological health and safety legislation.
Mm.
So there's increasing recognition that it's not just up to the teachers to implement
Yes.
self-care strategies. And in fact,
Yes.
I'm sick of it. I'm all for self-care strategies because
Yeah.
I think that is an important part of it, but it's not the whole picture. We need to increasingly recognize the role of the school or the organization and what are some of those psychosocial hazards. And I'm with you, William, and I know this might cause a heated debate, but perhaps it's just because we've never questioned the models that we've had, like in terms of teachers moving from one classroom to another. And for me, if I'm putting my wellbeing lens on it, it gives the teacher, the educator, the time, even if it's just a 5 minutes extra, to recalibrate in between, because you're still experiencing the emotions, whatever, you're still processing cognitively from that class, and really to be able to recalibrate and move into the next class with a fresh mind, fresh eyes of how you're viewing the students and the content. You need that space to
There it
do
is. And
that.
also it speaks to, again, I go back to in a delivery model, if that's, and we may not even go, oh, that's what I believe. But a lot of times that's actually it's just about getting through the exam. I'm going to dump information on, and I don't mean it, I'm not bagging anybody, but in a delivery model, I can go from room to room because all I'm doing. But when you talk about who the teacher is matters, the relationship, there was a conversation around trauma-informed practices. And I said, the classroom is a trauma-informed practice because you're creating a well-being center, whether you know it or not. And if you've got the right system in place, you can create the rituals and procedures that lower, you say positive emotions, we talk about lowering the affective filter. And so it creates the conditions where people can, you would say, thrive, and I would say help get the outcomes we want. So it's okay to say we've got all this information about well-being, but the teaching and learning pieces is how we get the behavioral change with that incredible information. And it's not by just delivering.
No, look, I just attended the Australian Psych Society Clinical Psych Conference and did a half-day workshop on trauma-informed practice. And there was a significant piece around trauma-informed design and how we
Yes.
design environments. And a lot of it was speaking to clinical, I guess, environments. But my takeaway from that presentation was that this isn't just for clinical environments. This is for school settings. This is for workplace settings. And I think given what we're now finding out around how much trauma is in our community, when there's going to be more discussion around how do we create these environments. Just one other comment on the delivery model.
Yeah.
It goes completely against what we know from self-determination theory in terms of, we know people are more likely to pursue goals to actually engage with the work if they have a sense of autonomy. So, as you know, William, my approach is a coaching style, and I am aware that more teachers are taking that approach rather than a pure delivery. But I think, again, it's perhaps a bigger question around how much content are they being required to deliver, and where is the space in their day and the students' day for reflective practice, for, again, for teaching and learning benefits, but for their well-being also, to take a breath.
Well, where that fits then is, so from the unleashed learning system perspective, if someone's learning about trauma, it's like, oh my gosh, something else to do. And I'd say, no, that's the key of classroom.
Yes.
There's a ship that does not change even when things change, period, full stop.
A secure base.
Yes. And so once that's in place, but we also need a teaching and learning mission because, and this could be controversial, and I mean it from both places. A school, now let me finish the sentence, but I will say it a couple ways. A school is not a well-being organization. It's a teaching and learning organization, but it is a well-being organization. I will say that, but we are a teaching and learning organization. So what happens is the well-being can come and then we become where it's like, oh my God, I have something else to do. But when there's a teaching and learning mission designed for a very specific kind of outcome, then we're going to organize our classroom in a certain way for this. And if I learn about trauma-informed practices and I know the descriptor, I know about the classroom, then I can take that information and go, oh, I can tweak it here and tweak it here, but it's not something else I've got to do. So most of this conversation will fit into a system. And once it's in place, people can take on more information and just keep becoming even better sailors, but not jumping from ship to ship to ship to ship. And that's what's getting in the way.
Exactly. And in my experience, not just educators, but anyone working in a school might not necessarily engage with wellbeing science for themselves, but when they see it's in service of the students, that might be the hook that gets them in there. But ultimately, we know from the research that teacher wellbeing is correlated with student wellbeing. So there does need to be a requirement to, rather than seeing it as selfish, as being self-full. But as you said, now we have increasing legislation and recognition that we need to look at the shared responsibility between the school and the individual when it comes to well-being.
So that's the captain of the ship. So in the unleashed learning system, I mean, most of the frameworks, there's one in WA that I really like, but most of the frameworks do not talk about who the teacher is.
No, that's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's now WA had a piece. So when unleashed learning comes to a school, we talk about leadership from the inside out, teaching from the inside out. And for many people, that's very confronting because it's what they've been trained is to do to deliver. And what we're saying is, no, it's inside out. And also back to the key of teacher. So again, there's a ship that does not change even when things change, full stop, if we want to get learning to stick. And I've interviewed thousands of people and I will say, tell me about your favorite teacher. Sometimes they'll talk about the subject, but most of the time they talk about who the person was. That's what they remember.
That's absolutely
right. Remember the captain of the ship.
That's right.
But that ship does not change. So if trauma-informed practice comes, you go, oh, that's part of the ship. And that's really good information. I can strengthen that part of the ship, but I'm not going to be overwhelmed anymore.
No, exactly. And look, decades of research in psychology around the importance of a secure base. And depending on attachment style of individuals, some children and adults require a stronger secure base than others for the capacity to take risks.
Yes.
And when it comes to learning, we need to be able to feel comfortable, and not to say that we don't feel any discomfort, but we have that underpinning secure base so we can lean into the learning.
So that's the key of students and we're trying to lower the guard. We don't want the guard totally. We're like, hey, nothing. There's a little bit of but there's a way to do it. And that's what makes it stick. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, that's okay. So we've probably already started to cover some of this, but in your opinion, how does wellbeing support effective teaching and learning? Anything additional to what we've already discussed?
Well, it's in the teacher and student well-being is in service of it. So we've talked about who the teacher is matters, right? Who the student, here's an example of the student, why the student matters so much is we know about schema, prior knowledge, but it's even bigger than that. I'm going to go clinical for a second. It's called the reader response theory. The reader response theory, what it says is cognition happens between, I don't have a book, well, here's my book, between the reader and the text. It's an interaction. In a delivery model, I just tell you this is what it's about.
Mm.
But it's literally the interaction between who the person is.
Mm-hmm.
Paulo Freire says we read the world before we read the word. What that means is who the person is matters. So they're central to the ways we make learning stick. So the well-being piece is if we create an environment, and it does not mean to be we're rah-rah and it's more to do. The key of classroom helps. There's an environment we create that can help. You'd say positive emotions, I'd say lower the filter, that creates the cognitions to get the outcome. So if I'm a maths teacher, it's critical that the guard is lowered, the safety is there, and I can get the outcomes.
Absolutely, William. And I think the curious thing to me is we've all known for decades and decades the impact of mental ill health on learning. But why are we questioning the increasing, body of evidence around the benefits of mental well-being, on the positive effects of mental well-being? So I think we intuitively know it, and I think the good news is that the research is continuing to support that.
We just need the right, what we need is a systems thinking approach to teaching and learning, not a strategies thinking approach. We need a systems thinking approach where there's a mission system that does not change, even when things change, that this is the North Star or Southern Cross, depending where people are listening to this. And there's a ship so that when we know how that works and it's easy to understand, then this information, we just get better at sailing. So if I go to a workshop about trauma-informed practice, I'm not thinking, oh my gosh, something else I got to do. What I'm thinking is, oh, that fits here.
Right.
And it's making me a better sailor. But no one can remember standard 2.5.6 or, there's literally now, this is the environment we're living in, is there are strategies, Facebook groups where people are like, here's the latest strategy. Here's the latest in service of what is my question. So if we want to make learning stick, then there's a ship, and then we can take on new information and just keep getting better and better, but not jumping from ship to ship to ship, which lowers stress and boosts impact.
Absolutely. Look, it's the same applies when it comes to well-being science. Everyone, and in fact, having worked with many educators over the years, it's just, okay, Suzy, just give us the strategies.
Yes.
And my response is usually, look, I can give you all the strategies in the world, but we actually know from research it's who you are, and it's the alliance, the working alliance that you have between you and, in my case, my client, but in the educator's case, between the relationship with the student or the student body, that's going to ensure that that it does make the learning stick, if you like.
That's what we need, the mission. Sorry.
The other thing that you're referring to with mission, for me, and a lot of the work we do is exactly that. We look at what's the school overarching strategy that they have to report on, and then how does the wellbeing strategy align and support the overall strategy. But in some of the pioneering schools I've worked with, it's been the teaching, learning, and wellbeing. So it's all been, there may be a separate teaching and learning, but it's very easily integrated and connected. So they're not seen as two separate things. But I think we're also talking about meaning and meaningfulness, aren't we here, William? Because if you're an educator, and as you said, you can see the bigger picture and your role in it, that's going to lead to greater sense of meaningfulness in my role and why I'm doing what I do, and even remembering why I came in to do this work. And that can be really hard to do in the busyness of, the school structure.
Well, it's not, it's when the reason what's missing in the school is, well, the unleashed learning schools have it. And I've been doing this for 30 years. Most schools do not have a teaching and learning mission. And if we're talking about teaching and learning, we are a teaching and learning organization. The challenge with a school is they have these missions, but it doesn't inform. I'm being really polite. I'm not trying to, it's not influencing the pedagogical approach most of the times. And the reason it needs to be one thing is that when it comes then to the well-being piece, my goal is to make that stick. Well, how do I do that? it's a new reading initiative. Well, what makes learning stick? It's always the same. So then what the leader's job is we do that in leadership 3, I think, but we talk about the inspiration where you become like Oprah. We say lead like Oprah, you show, don't tell.
Yeah.
And you show by bringing examples of the impact when learning stuck for other people, because that connects to people's meaning and purpose. So the leadership job, I would argue, is partly the showing, because sometimes as a teacher, what is the outcome we're after? And then when we put the teaching learning mission, it's on target. And then all of a sudden we're all there. And then all this stuff is in service of where we're trying to go.
That's right. And I think, again, just in the busyness, I see this in organizations as well as schools, that we can lose sight of that bigger picture. And so for leaders, it's particularly important that they remind, the team, or the school principal there has a platform to consistently remind people
Yes.
why we're doing this. And I think the same applies. I know for myself, when I was in school, William, I was constantly frustrated with my maths teacher because he wouldn't give the reason or the rationale for why we were learning trigonometry, for
Yes.
example. And I was constantly saying, I need to know why, because as soon as I understood why, I could engage with the learning. And I
So
think the same.
here's the science. The science of that is to get it to stick. It's the key of students. So that's why we've got to talk about teaching and learning. I mean, to me, teaching and learning is like it's the missing conversation to maximize the outcomes. The science is we've got to know who students are, and then we build a bridge between the content and the students. So if I'm noticing that the why question, my job is to build a bridge between the students and the content. That's how it literally works. And then that's why I call it unleashing. We're trying to bring out of people.
Yes.
So there's a bridge. That's the science. And when that does not change, So when that comes into place, and there's a way to do the why, because what happens sometimes is we'll say, we're doing this because,
Yes.
which is a killer. We could be asking a different question and saying, how is this impacting you?
Yes,
Like we could,
or throwing it to the students. Why do
yes,
you think we might be covering
yes.
this topic today? How do you think it's going to be relevant to you in your life?
Which is what that's all we did a talk once about the connection between coaching and teaching and learning, because what coaches do is bring out of people. And you wouldn't say, well, you might at times, you'd explain, but you're not going to go do this, da, 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 da. You're bringing out of somebody. So it's the same thing applies, but it also then will inform how we set up the classroom, because we might have posters that explain it. We might have examples that explain it, and we create that environment, and that never changes.
No.
Never changes.
Now, William, I'm not entirely sure how we're tracking for time, but
Yeah.
do you have time to quickly run us through the 6 keys, just briefly, for
Yeah.
those that might be new to the interview series?
I'll talk about parts of them because I don't want to waste the
No.
time. One of them, well, we've talked about the key of classroom.
Yes.
But it's in service of making learning stick for everyone, right?
Yes.
So we have clear definitions about what these descriptors are, because the shared definition. So there's a system for setting up the classroom that really mirrors a lot of the pieces you talk about for well-being.
Yes.
Another piece I'll talk about, which is the key of engagement. There's a certain kind of engagement that makes learning stick for everyone. And one thing we have to mention too, especially for the people working in the well-being spaces, there's 2 kinds of learning, which is really short-term and long-term. If we want like behavioral change, transformation, there's a certain kind of engagement we use, facilitate, that makes that happen, right? And that one becomes a game changer for a lot of the schools, because what they say to me is, this is the opposite of what school was like for me. And so they have to, they go, I had to unlearn.
Yeah.
But that connects to the key of teacher, because our pedagogy connects to our histories and our backgrounds. So those are a few pieces of it. I mean, we're almost out of time, but we're really talking about but they work together. There's 6 of it. They work together in service of that. So if we've got well-being, or let's say it's a reading initiative, all pieces, who the teacher is, how they plan, the 3 parts of the lesson, the key of engagement, who the students are, inclusion, those never change, even when everything's changing. So it's the ship you use to get to a destination.
That's right. It's such a great model, William, and one in particular of particular relevance when we are considering application of wellbeing science. So we know that leaders are crucial. There's so much research
Incredible.
on the impact of leaders on the energy and the well-being and mental health of the people that they interact with on a day-to-day basis. What can school leaders do to support teacher well-being?
Well, there's the literacy piece. I mean, everyone should bring the Positivity Institute into schools all over the country,
Thank
right?
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But first, what I would suggest is and I'm not doing this to plug Unleashed Learning, you first put the system in place. So when the system comes into place and then you come in, then their cognitive load is lowered. So the first thing we need to do is help lower people's cognitive load, full stop. And we do that by putting a teaching and learning mission in place, and we put a system in place that can lower the cognitive load. And then the second thing, and I always go on and on about it, is teachers need their own classrooms. I had a teacher, she used to, I don't have long enough hair to do it, but she would stress and she would do this,
Stimming, actually, from
Thank you very much.
yeah.
So she got her own classroom and she never did it again. And I said, tell me about that. And she goes, I am a totally different teacher. And from a trauma-informed practice, she said, I put coffee and tea out and the kids kind of hang out in my room all day long during breaks. And I formed more meaningful connections with the students and I'm not stressed. So those are two pieces of it. But we also, in Leadership Academy 3, the leadership team interviews teachers across the school to figure out, to hear what's going on for them. We call it circuits of energy, but how to help cut back to see the patterns of what's going on systemically. So those are a couple things.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think, as I've sort of reiterated today, we now have legislation that requires schools to look to review psychosocial hazards, which might be, structures, systems. I mean, this is the perfect time to rethink school timetables and classrooms, as you're suggesting, because of these requirements. But there's also an individual responsibility. So there's still a place for those working in schools to think about their well-being and to see, as you said, how is this meaningful to me in my own life, my family life, but also for my students and in service of the teaching and learning mission. But there's so much that
I know there's so much we could talk about.
We could talk about, isn't there? Do you have any final comments, William, before I release the interview today?
I think the piece is, there really is a new way forward for teaching and learning, and the times are calling for a newer way that's bigger than we think. It's more holistic and inclusive, and it connects the teachers and students. All these pieces come together. And I'll just leave it at this. I had a friend that used to say, we need to study ourselves as much as our profession.
Absolutely.
And that's why there's so much connection to what we do.
Two true words, William. So thank you so much for letting me take over the channel today. Thank you for all the wonderful work that you do and our ongoing, inspiring, energizing conversations that we have. And perhaps we might even put something into a blog or an article at some point. So stay posted, stay tuned to Unleashed Learning TV, and hope to see you in the future.
Thanks, Suzy. Be well. So if you like this video, you should also watch this one.